Welcome back to our channel. Thank you for being with us over the past time. Your likes and your opinions are the motivation that pushes us to create even better videos. Now let's get into today's content. Bill's sudden collapse struck like thunder in the middle of the power court Hayley had worked so hard to infiltrate. The moment he went down wasn't just a medical shock. It was a death knell for the entire system of lies she had built with smiles, wedding rings, and counterfeit vows. In a single breath, Hayley felt the floor beneath her splinter, as if every layer of a predator's makeup were being washed away by a flood, revealing the bare bones of panic underneath. She wasn't afraid of Bill dying in an ordinary way. She was afraid of him dying in a way that would make doctors start asking questions. One sign of poisoning in the file, one toxicology test activated by proper procedure, and she would be handcuffed right in the hospital corridor before she could even invent an excuse. And worse, if Hayley fell, Randy would be dragged down with her like a pitch-black anchor. The anger in Hayley didn't flare as pure emotion. It was the rage of someone forced into survival mode, of someone who had gambled her entire life on a hand of cards that was now being flipped too early. She was angry at Bill for daring to collapse at the exact moment she was closing in on the peak of her ruthless dream, angry at karma for yanking away her safety line without warning, and angry at herself because no matter how brutally careful she had been, a single medical detail could still destroy her. Hayley understood perfectly that the most dangerous thing wasn't her medication. It was other people's paperwork. A hospital is where science and law clamp together like twin vices, and whoever holds medical decision-making power holds the last heartbeat of the truth. That's why her first bold move wasn't to interfere with the treatment plan immediately, but to storm the battlefield of procedures like a raider. She pressured the hospital to recognize her as the legal medical decision-maker, using her status as Bill's lawful wife like a blade set right on the consultation table, while simultaneously spinning a story just plausible enough to turn Naomi's or Chelsea's late arrival into a family emotional disruption that needed to be temporarily set aside for the benefit of the emergency. In Hayley's mind, it wasn't love or devotion being activated. It was the instinct of a professional con artist. Build a rushed legal framework that forces everyone to accept her as legitimate before they can even smell the fraud. She arranged an urgent meeting with Bill's lawyer, then floated the idea of an additional codicil like a dark life raft to keep herself afloat in the rising sea. Hayley constructed the argument that Bill had developed a deep fear of death after Winterfest, that he wanted to reorder everything because he had discovered a potential underlying health risk, that he had expressed anxiety about leaving his assets to people who might damage the family's honor. Every word she spoke was sharpened to turn crisis into opportunity, to transform a panicked wife into the guardian of her husband's final wishes. But inside, her fury and shame fused into a new kind of toxin. She knew she was walking a wire, and one flicker of suspicion from the lawyer could turn that codicil into evidence of a predatory financial scheme. Randy entered this plan like someone yanked off a safe shore. At first he refused, because even if his past wasn't clean, he still understood the difference between a legal dodge and a forgery that could annihilate an entire bloodline. But Hayley wasn't here to ask permission. She cornered him with the only weapon she could fully trust, his own dirty history. She reminded him of the money that had flowed through shell companies, the numbers that had disappeared during a shady restructuring, the suspicious traces of tax fraud, or a deal in which someone's accident had once been staged in exchange for profit. Hayley didn't need to say much. She only had to press the right fear at Randy's core, and he would see the vision of his family collapsing, his career buried alive, his reputation dragged through the public dirt of Fairmont Crest. Randy's anger at being forced didn't explode outward. It turned inward, hardening him into someone who hated Hayley and feared her at the same time. He began to participate not out of shared belief, but out of shared desperation. And that kind of desperation is the most dangerous of all. Randy would do anything to save himself, even if it meant betraying Hayley the moment he spotted a safer escape route. Manufactured witnesses were arranged, and glittering fragments of, "I once heard Bill talk about adjusting the inheritance," were staged like a performance with a dangerous steel core. Hayley understood the power of internal rumor in elite circles. Sometimes a single social confirmation from the right person, at the right party, tied to the right stretch of memory, could create a substitute truth strong enough to keep a lawyer quiet, a notary blinking, and a family council temporarily leaning in her favor. But the faster she pushed the pace, the more she felt the shadow of mistake stalking her. Every signature, every stamp, every minute ticking away in the notary's waiting room felt like dropping another stone into an already overloaded coat pocket. She was angry that she had to rely on Randy, angry that she had to trade yet another secret to buy his obedience, and angry that this battlefield no longer belonged to a silent poisoning plot. It had morphed into an open legal war unfolding beside a hospital bed. The real suffocation lay in the possibility that Bill might wake up at the worst possible moment. Hayley pictured his eyes snapping, open just as the paperwork was finalized, when the additional codicil was still fresh with ink, and her face was still trying to hold a sanctified disguise. If that happened, the scheme wouldn't just collapse. It would become a noose hanging directly over her and Randy. Even more terrifying, Hayley couldn't be sure whether Bill would react like a victim or like a hunter. If he tore everything apart immediately, she'd lose it all in a single heartbeat and might spiral into reckless mistakes so obvious that the police wouldn't even need toxicology to build a case. But if Bill chose silence, if he chose to play the weak patient while stockpiling evidence, Hayley would be forced to keep moving inside a maze built by her opponent. Naomi or Chelsea hearing the phrase, additional codicil, just once could ignite suspicion. And Hayley knew that in Bill's world, his daughters weren't just family. They were legal barricades, moral leverage any lawyer would think twice about challenging. As a second branch of the plot opened, Hayley shifted from quiet poisoning to something more ruthless, turning Bill's death into an unavoidable medical event. This was the moment when fear and anger merged into a destructive survival instinct. She no longer wanted only the assets. She wanted control over how the story would be told after Bill was gone. If his death could be wrapped in the shell of a rare complication. If medication records and staffing charts could be scrambled just enough to prevent anyone from assembling the full picture, Hayley could emerge as a grieving, sympathetic widow instead of a murderer. Randy was dragged deeper into the mire, forced to use shadowy connections to meddle with shift rosters, swap nurses, or place a money-trustworthy staffer on duty on the critical night. He was terrified and furious, because each step deeper was another cut to his path of return. Hayley gave him no alternative, coldly reminding him that if he ran, she would push the entire blame onto him as the mastermind, turning his family into the epicenter of an investigation. Randy began to realize Hayley wasn't an ally. She was the knife behind his back, ready to stab the moment he slowed down. The greatest risk of this branch wasn't even the drugs, it was the traces. One small inconsistency in a record, one hallway camera catching the wrong person at the wrong time, or a nurse suddenly remembering that the schedule had been altered in a suspicious way, and the complication would instantly be dragged into the light of the word murder. And just when Hayley thought she was controlling the flow of events, Bill might display a brief flicker of consciousness, enough to leave a fatal signal. A hand squeeze with a trusted doctor, a stare held long enough to chill a witness, or a small movement that forced the hospital to reassess everything. Hayley would be trapped between two masks, the wife collapsing in grief, or the wife standing strong to protect her husband's honor. And every choice was a trap. If she seemed too shattered, she'd be seen as performing. If she seemed too composed, she'd be questioned for her unnatural calm in the face of catastrophe. The cruelest psychological twist emerged when the possibility that Bill's coma was not innocent became a new blade pointed at Hayley. Maybe before collapsing, Bill had begun to suspect the strange dizziness after drinks she prepared, or a suspicious test result that someone had accidentally delayed, or maybe a half-joking, half-careless remark from Randy during a drunken night had placed Hayley's name beside the words dosage and timing, enough for Bill to connect the fragments, something a man seasoned in power would never ignore. If Bill had secretly partnered with a trusted doctor to stage a convincing medical scenario, then Hayley wasn't battling fate. She was battling a calculated counterstrike. He didn't need to fully wake to win. He only needed to lie there, listen, remember, and let Hayley expose herself through overly probing questions about toxicology, rushed attempts to intervene in records, and the stiffness of her effort to play the perfect wife in front of professional eyes. In this scenario, Randy grew even more horrified as he realized he might not be Hayley's accomplice, but a pawn in Bill's trap. His instincts began searching for an exit. If Bill truly was setting a net, then the only person who could save Randy from the harshest sentence might be Bill himself. That thought ignited a bitter rage in Randy. He resented Hayley for turning him into a disposable piece, resented Bill for the cruelty of a man capable of using his own life as bait, and resented himself for letting greed and fear drag him to the edge of a criminal abyss. Hayley was no better. She saw the change in Randy's eyes, sensed trust cracking under pressure, and understood that the collapse of a conspiracy sometimes doesn't come from lawyers or doctors, but from an accomplice who suddenly decides he wants to live. The tension at Fairmont Crest, therefore, wouldn't stay confined to the ICU, it would seep outward like poison into every relationship. Naomi and Chelsea might arrive as moral fires that threatened to burn away Hayley's disguise, but they could also become targets manipulated by their fear of losing their father. Hayley might attempt to build a counterfeit family frontline, pretending she was protecting Bill from emotional stress, while in truth protecting herself from the sharpest questions. Every time Naomi stepped close to the bed, Hayley might feel a wall collapsing inside her mind. She feared the daughters, yet she hated them for existing as a lawful authority that outweighed her. And in that hatred, Hayley became more likely to make mistakes, to reveal her impatience through extreme decisions. If Bill ultimately woke after all this, the question wouldn't be whether he could forgive, but which form of destruction he would choose to reclaim control of the narrative. He might remain silent longer, letting Hayley and Randy increase their own criminal exposure, tightening the noose around their necks with every frantic move. Or he could shatter everything directly in front of Hayley, pushing her into a breakdown as her last mask was ripped away. Either way, Hayley would face a wall with no exit. Either she would be exposed as a wealth-hunting wife who poisoned her husband, or she would be driven into absolute panic and take even more reckless steps to silence witnesses, erase trails, or gamble on a last-minute reversal with tears and the performance of a widow in waiting. What gives this arc its full soap opera intensity isn't just the legal danger. It's the psychological collapse of people who believed they could control other people's fate. Hayley entered the hospital with hopes of becoming a rich widow, only to discover that a hospital is a battlefield for those who can do more than counterfeit love. Randy came in under coercion, but the longer he stayed, the more he felt himself trapped between two crushing machines. On one side, Hayley with her blackmail, on the other Bill with a cold, lethal intelligence that could surface at any moment. And Bill, though motionless, might still be the most dangerous of all, because if he had suspected the truth beforehand, then this collapse was not defeat but bait. Within the fog of swapped shifts, staged testimonies, concealed calls to lawyers, and medical records that seemed lifeless but could kill a future, Fairmont Crest would witness a war in which every character is pushed into the corner of their own nature. Hayley would be forced to choose between pushing Bill closer to death to protect the plan, or retreating to preserve a fragment of her fabricated legitimacy and avoid the police. Randy would be forced to choose between loyalty to someone who holds his secrets, or betrayal in exchange for freedom before it's too late. And Bill would be forced to choose between swift revenge to cut out betrayal like a tumor, or slow revenge that lets Hayley and Randy become the ones who sign their own sentences. All of them would be caught in a game where one altered beep on a monitor, one ward door opening at the wrong second, or one trembling signature born of fear could bring the entire empire of deception crashing down like shattered glass, exposing the cold truth that the most lethal poison in this room isn't only in Bill's bloodstream, but in the greed and rage of the people standing around his bed.